Hi, my name is Christopher Donald. Welcome to my channel, and this is going to be another in my series of debunking ceramics myths. This one is a little bit more complex, frankly. Is stacking pots in a bisque kiln a bad idea? Is it going to make the pots warp or crack? All right, so let's talk a little bit about the bisquing process and the parameters of bisquing. Bisque firing kind of came about during more the Industrial Revolution when we were trying to lower the skill level of our workforce for working in ceramic studios. And one way of doing that was to not be dipping greenware into glazes in order to glaze fire things. Prior to that, most glazing was done on greenware. We did not actually bisque fire things before glazing them. Bisque firing makes the pieces more durable and easier to handle through the glazing process. So they're less likely to get broken while they're being glazed. And a less knowledgeable and trained workforce was able to do more work and damage fewer pieces. So that's where bisque firing comes from. Bisque firing is not an absolute. Bisque firing, there's a whole range. There are people who bisque fire to a very low temperature, so the things are barely hardened. And there's people that like bisque firing to a much higher temperature, so that the pieces are less absorbent. Some of it depends on what kinds of glazes you're doing. Some of it has to do with what your glaze application is. The temperature that you bisque fire to changes the amount of porosity of the bisque. So if I fire the bisque cone 012 or something, it's like chalk. It's very absorbent. It's very porous, and it's going to absorb glaze very quickly and dry out very fast, which could be a huge advantage if I'm doing a lot of intense slip trail patterning with glazes. I know people who do a lot of trailing work tend to bisque fire a little bit lower because they want the glaze to dry very quickly on the surface. You're doing an intense pattern. You kind of want it to be drying as you're doing it so that it goes nice and fast. If you're spraying glazes, you might want to bisque fire a little bit higher, and you want less of it to go on. You want to build it up in thin layers or something like that. So there's different reasons for bisquing at different temperatures. And studios will generally kind of find a temperature that is more or less durable and effective for kind of everybody, and keeps the cost down. Like bisquing a little bit lower is going to be cheaper than bisquing at a higher temperature. You're just firing for less time. So, but every studio has kind of their own temperature that they'll get at. It's kind of general range, but it can change a little bit. And honestly, depending on where your piece is in the kiln, especially in a larger kiln, it might be a little higher or lower bisquing temperature. So making a general statement about stacking being universally bad at bisquing temperatures is ignoring the fact that there is not a standard bisquing temperature, and that's a sliding scale. So let's say that I want to fire a lot of work in my bisque kilns, pack a lot of it in, and I make things that are very thin, or like I make thin tile or something like that, which is going to be more likely to want to warp at higher temperatures. But I want to just bisque fire it so that I can get my glazes sprayed on it and be done. I'm going to bisque at a lower temperature because the clay isn't going to soften as much at that lower temperature, and my thinner work is much less likely to warp or have any problems. And I can stack the heck out of it because I'm just not going up very hot. So why is it that people think that stacking causes problems? Most of the time, if something is going to warp or crack in the bisque firing at that low of a temperature, there was something wrong with the piece going in. You didn't compress it well when you made it. There were issues with its drying. Something along those lines is much, much more likely to be causing cracking or warping than the actual bisque firing itself. And there is some common sense in this. I mean, you can exacerbate a situation. You know, if I have a cup like this and then I put a plate on top of it and then I put some heavy things on top of the plate, and it's not supported in the middle except by the top of this cup, I'm kind of asking for it. If I'm bisquing at a higher temperature, it could warp because of that. But if I'm taking cups and I'm stacking them rim to rim and they're the same size, or I'm stacking them foot to foot, this is a structurally sound form, and there's really no reason why it should be warping or having any problems in bisque firing at that kind of low temperature. So I would say that if you're, especially if you're firing your own work, you really know kind of how you're constructing things, and you're much more likely to be able to twig onto something being an issue based on your construction rather than blaming it on the firings. And that's more my position as far as having worked in production. You know, we knew how our things were being made. We knew a lot about the clay, a lot about our process, a lot about our forming. And heck, if I had a lid warp during bisque firing, I knew I just did something wrong. And I would look back at my process and try and figure it out, especially if it was consistent. If I had a couple of them do that, it's definitely not the kiln at that point. It's me, and I just need to look at my process. When you're firing work in a group studio, say like when I was working at Boston University, you have students at a lot of different levels and a lot of different construction techniques and styles, and you just need to be aware of which things are going to be marginal based on their skill level and how they're making stuff, and you just don't stack those things in a way that is working against them. And if I've got somebody making things that are like wildly uneven, I'm gonna put it in the kiln in a way that it's as well supported as I can achieve to kind of help them out a little bit. But if I'm putting in just like small thrown pieces, I mean, most of them are thick as heck, and they're real sturdy, and any warping is definitely not because of them being stacked in a weird way in the bisque kiln. When they come out of the glaze kiln, they're gonna go all over the place because they were thrown really weird or dried really strange or something like that. So that's generally what's more going on than your stacking. I can comfortably say that in my 40 years in the industry, one, I have never broken anyone's work, loading or unloading a bisque kiln. That has never happened. Not my own work or anyone else's work. I'm very careful. Two, I have never seen any evidence that stacking alone is somehow responsible for warping or cracking in ceramic work at bisque temperatures. I've seen no evidence for that. And I've worked with students from every skill level, from second graders all the way up to graduate level adult students, people who've worked for decades. I just have not seen any evidence for it. So I generally can look at a piece and tell you what part of the process it failed at because of, and 9 times out of 10 it's something having to do with construction or drying rather than it having anything to do with the firing process. Bisque firing is a fairly low temperature. It does not put that much stress on the pieces. Now, if we're talking about like cone 10, all faults come out at cone 10. Things become taffy-like at cone 10. Clay bodies are at their maximum vitreousness and density at cone 10. But cone 05, bisque temperatures, low fire earthenware, man, you can get away with murder at those temperatures. So is stacking pots in a bisque kiln something that that will make them absolutely warp or crack? Not if it's done correctly. Just like anything in ceramics, you need to know what you're doing. You need to be thoughtful and aware. And if you are, then there shouldn't be any problems. I stack work all the time and have through my entire career. So I have no worries about it. Anyway, so hopefully that helps a bit. I think this is one of those great questions where it requires some explanation of our processes and the science and the nature of what's happening when we're doing our work, that often that granularity isn't really conveyed to students. I don't know that it's out of really wanting to dumb things down or just wanting to kind of move on and let's just tell you the high points, and it's not that important that you know all the detail. I frankly feel like every student should be taught at a high level, that I never make assumptions about what someone already knows or what they understand. And I try and give a complete explanation for some of these topics, not because I think somehow people are dumb or something and they need extra explanation, but because things that can appear obvious to a subject matter expert, to somebody who really knows their material, are not obvious to everyone. And it's important that we don't assume that things that we think of as being kind of like background noise are something that someone's been made aware of in their ceramic journey. It's not a failing of our students if there's something they don't know, because it's probably because we just didn't tell them yet. So hopefully I've told you something. There's a AA joke that I particularly like, which is there's a school of young fish swimming through the ocean, and an older fish swims past them. And as the old fish swims past, he says, "Hey, how's the water?" And he swims on, and the young fish kind of look at each other, and one fish says to the other one, "What the boop is water?" So that's the world of the subject matter expert. When you know your material inside and out, often you forget that there's all these parts to your process that other people aren't aware of, they aren't as familiar with. And we start to think of it as all just being the water that we're swimming in. So anyhow, again, if you have any clay myths or clay facts that you think maybe are a little dodgy and you're wondering about them, feel free to leave a comment or message me, and I'll be happy to address other myths. They're kind of coming up constantly. So thanks for joining me. Please subscribe so you'll get alerted to new videos in the future as they drop. And I'll see you back here again soon. Take care. Bye.